think especially early on, it was very fresh still, and I know I wanted to make this, but I was still kind of, whenever it would come time to present it to a group or something, I would get really overwhelmed and be like, oh my god, okay. And I got better at that. Keely has such a great way of being my best critic, which means she's always just gonna say how it is.
Yeah.
And I think I fear that in some ways, where it's like, all right, what do you think of this? And especially with this project, it was very much, very personal. So I wanted to make sure that I would say she was sort of my spiritual executive producer. When we lost Cooper, there was a moment in which they were like, would you like to take pictures, with maybe your hands and this and that, and it would immediately, I'm like, no. And Carly, the nurse, was like, no, you should, this is important and great. And Keely was like, okay, I think we should. And the company's called Now I Lay You Down to Sleep. They're a great group, and they do infant loss photos for families for free. They're amazing. But she was in the short, you have to make sure you honor that. And so a lot of the big emotional anchors of the project was really from her support, and really just trying to make sure that we're honoring what we went through and also other folks. There's a moment in the short where they say goodbye to the child that they lose, and she was such a strong encourager of, no, they have to, early on I was like, well, maybe it's more symbolic, she's like, no, it's important. I feel like you don't really heal fully from grief. I feel more like you develop a relationship with it, and you learn how to keep it with you instead of keeping it at arm's length. I always knew the characters needed to transform, and I love Disney transformations so much. There's been so many amazing transformations over the films over the years. Like Beauty and the Beast is probably one of my favorites. So I knew, like, man, wouldn't it be cool to do something, I want to do a Disney transformation with the magic and the twirling and all of that, but it always felt like, well, they need to transform into a new version of themselves. I was trying to figure out a way so that the characters can actually completely come apart, and then when they come back together, they're a new version of themselves, and they're not fixed. Like if they're cracked, I didn't want to have them come back together and then they're healed. And so there was a conversation we were having in development with Liz Watson, who was our head of development, and she was one of our big thought partners on this project early on. And she asked, have you ever thought about Kintsugi? I didn't realize I knew what that was, but I was like, I don't know what that is. And as soon as we, opened, it was one of those moments where it's like immediately that was the answer. It's like, yes, you cracked it, because it's also, there's no dialogue, and it's not, they can't say I'm healed, but it's still with me, And so it was such an incredible visual. Early on, there was a bit of a chicken or the egg thing, where it's like, okay, we want to do this choreographed thing. Where do we start? Do we start with the choreography? Do we start with the music? Do we start with the boards? So we were thinking about that for a bit, and what we came up with was we'd start with all of it, just a little bit at a time. So we brought music in way earlier than we normally do. So Haim Mazar was our composer, and normally we work with the composer more near the end of the project. We'll do music and maybe cut something in, maybe music that exists, and then later we'll work with the composer to kind of compose it. But because of how emotional the performances needed to be, we felt like, man, the music needs to be pretty close, or at least pointed at what it's going to be at the end early. So when Kat Hill and Ben Augusto, our choreographers, start working out the performance on skates, it's actually going to, all the beats and all the feeling, the music is so expressive on its own. If they're feeling something and they do something in the performance to that particular part in the music, if that changes, it could potentially change the essence of that performance. So we really wanted to try to stay consistent with all of that. And so we ended up bringing Haim in early. He did a lot of work trying to find the melody. This was one of the first projects where we've had our characters that I've worked on, where we've had lighting and effects working with modeling and look early on. And so whenever we would do character reviews, we would actually have almost the entire pipeline present, which was kind of fun because we had to create a few new ways of just getting that information easily to the modeling department and to the look department. And so it got teams that don't normally get to have much face time communicating a lot more, which is really cool because by the time we got into production, animation and lighting already had a vocabulary, which normally kind of they don't develop that quite as close. With a lot of the backgrounds, we had made all these little like prop cloud shapes that we could use and sort of compose the scenes, to make sure the staging is right and make sure that it's just designed instead of it feeling just sort of nebulous. And so we had all these little like Lego pieces of nebula that we could bring in. It's like we need another round A nebula shape. It's like, okay, bring that in. So we had the nursery, which was screen right. That's kind of the anchor. Then we had sort of a peninsula that would go out into a point. And then we had what we called the battle dome at the end, where they, it's like this big arena with this, Ryan designed this great, sort of ring around the arena. But those are a big three set pieces. Having lived with it for about 7-8 years before starting to produce it, made the feeling of seeing it very, it was very surreal in the way of like, oh wow, now this exists. At the very end, the last card says in memory of Cooper. Casper, he was born at the end of Moana, so we lost Cooper at the beginning and found out, he was born in the beginning of Wreck-It Ralph too, but we found out we were pregnant with Casper at the end of Moana. And a child you have after an infant loss is called a rainbow baby. So the idea of sort of a rainbow after the storm, which I always thought was very poetic. So the child at the end of the short has sort of a rainbow prism color around him. So that's the symbolism for the rainbow baby, but it is definitely sort of designed. That one is more designed after a young Casper. A lot of this was made at home. There's a few days a week where I'll work from home, and so we'll be in reviews, and Casper will come and sit on my lap and kind of watch reviews. And I do a lot of drawing for feedback, and so I'll do drawovers, and then he'll come in and say, "Can I help?" So there's one moment where he drew a little star on Mom's hair, and I was joking and sent that to the lighting team. I was like, all right, my son had a note on the, but then the lighter was like, I put that star over there. So there's a frame where the star he drew is actually in the Mom's hair. It's when she kind of comes, they come back and she shakes her hair. There's a little star in her hair. He's got these like freckles, we call them his constellations. He's got these 3 freckles that's like a triangle on his face. And we got those, the child at the end, he's like, I'm in a movie. All of his friends go, yeah, I'm in a movie. And